When she got out of law school, she was highly recruited. Her family was politically correct, or politically connected, I mean. And of course, she belonged to the right clubs, or her parents belonged to the right clubs. And she went to the right schools, had the right credentials, and very bright, etc. So she became a right young prosecutor in the district attorney's office in Denver. And of course, her whole academic life, from grade school on, she was told how good she was, how smart or how brilliant she was. And mommy and daddy always bragged about how great and how brilliant she was. And some of her high school classmates that I knew kind of described her as a bit full of herself, or stuck up, as they would say back then. Anyway, through politics and movement and progress in the courts and various programs that the district attorney was able to provide for the constituents to get more federal funding and things like that, she became the rape specialist in Denver. Now, in a prior episode, I told you about how she illegally dispensed a downer to one of her complaining witnesses, resulting in having his stomach pumped. And thankfully, there were some people with cooler heads there that saw that the witness wasn't traumatized by being raped with a consensual sex with a monarch, but that she lost face and her family lost face, and she was actually committing suicide, which didn't occur to the bourgeois attitude of the deputy district attorney. In any event, there were other ramifications to this case. Now, the point of this case is that we have a whole group of quasi-liberals that claim to be sensitive to cross-cultural awareness and are very famously vociferous about multiculturalism and things like this, but it's only multiculturalism that they approve of. One of the things that they're aghast with is something done by some African tribes called genital mutilation. This is not politically correct, so they don't ascribe to multiculturalism there. Another one is some of the sexual mores of some tribes, particularly among the Laotian tribes like the Hmong, which this case involved. And there were other ramifications. If you recall, I told you about what happened in the case where she misinterpreted the panic and fear of testifying with fear from ostracization of her family because of violating tribal mores and things like this. So in any event, while this case was going on, my co-counsel and I had troubles too, because our client's father just couldn't understand why the case wasn't dismissed. And he was a king. And if he said something, it occurred. And here he is, he's an ally of the United States government, and they're fighting Viet Cong, they're allies, and his son is in the United States and was arrested, was in jail a few days, and the case is still going on, even though he's an ally, and he can't understand why his great allies, the great United States, can't do something about the case against his son. Some of his people were highly insultive toward my co-counsel and I because we couldn't get anything done. And what kind of lawyers were we if we couldn't get a relative of a king any kind of disposition other than an offer of jail time. And it started getting funny because Colorado now, most judges are ex-prosecutors, and prosecutors are very narrow-minded and aren't very experienced like they used to be. You had judges that were probate lawyers or probate trustees from banks, worked in various businesses, etc. Now they're all from the DA's office. And that's because the voters are so cheap. When the governor said we got to save on our pensions, and most appointees for the judiciary should have some Colorado civil service experience, that was interpreted to mean the DA's office. So anyway, I digress here.
Yes.
What happened on this case, though, is various people from the tribe were contacting various people wanting to know why the prosecution was proceeding. Thankfully, the judge we had in this case wasn't a former prosecutor. He had been a former federal agent and kind of knew what the politics were. And when somebody from the either Defense Department or State Department mentioned that there was a problem with the case, I believe what happened, and nobody ever talked about it, but I believe he took this young zealot deputy district attorney and explained to her how the cows eat the cabbage and things like this. My colleague and I were talking about double standards. We had clients that were arrested for giving away or selling an illegal drug by one pill, and she was given immunity to damn near kill a witness with the one Valium, and it wasn't ever held to account for that. But that's the double standard of justice. You got one side that has God on their side and the other one that doesn't, and the ones with God on their side are generally the prosecutors, and the rest of us are just evil people that get criminals off the street and frustrate the cops and things like this. In any event, that's what was going on. We had all this diplomatic pressure. You had a prosecutor too stupid to figure out what was going on, who damn near killed somebody, and I think she got some sort of award of being the sexual prosecutor of the year or whatever. I don't recall now what it was, but it's typical of the stuff that was going on under the Nixon administration, where they were trying to abolish common law and replace it with a form of statutory code and put everything on the cheap. It was a Republican administration, and Republicans have always felt the only thing taxpayers care about is taxes and to get the tax bill down, and we can't have higher taxes. Plus, at that time, they were trying to privatize everything, too. They were privatizing prisons, privatizing law enforcement, selling all kinds of gadgets to law enforcement, particularly after the Vietnam War. So you had all kinds of things going on at the same time, making a perfect storm for injustice, which we still haven't recovered from. For instance, you had all of these people going into the pension administrators, and the law of pensions were that you had to have an income from your investments equal to the amount you paid out for pensions. Well, when they privatized it, they let these people go in and say, see, if you had invested in the market, you would have 10 times the money you do now, and you should let us manage your funds. And then they do a PR campaign telling all the taxpayers that the professional stockbroker types should manage all these funds for the government. And essentially it was a big ripoff, but nobody realized that until much, much later. Anyway, the pensions were running a little bit behind because the legislature was reluctant to fund them fully, even though they promised that they would. And the business people private sector were coming in and saying, "Let us manage your funds. We'll make your funds worth more," and which was true until the bubble burst. But at that time, there was again pressure. Gas had gone up. There were gas shortages. Inflation was rising with the end of the Vietnam War, and generally you have to pay for a war somehow, either by inflation or by increased taxes, and Republicans never liked to have increased taxes, so they had inflation. And anyway, judges were asking for a raise, and they couldn't get a raise unless they promised to lengthen their work day for a half an hour. So instead of going on the bench at 9 or 9:30, they had to go on at 8:30 or 9. They got their raise by doing that. They also got their raise by shutting down jury trials a little bit. But the big thing is when you had lawyers coming from the private sector, some of them liked to be judges, some of them didn't. Some of them were on the bench a few years. Some of them made a career of it. But no matter what, they were entitled to a pension. So if somebody were a state employee for 10 years, that was 10 years paid into the pension. Somebody out of private practice wouldn't have any time in government service. And if they only stayed 4 or 5 years as a judge, it costs the state. So the word went down to the Judicial Selection Committee, tried to get people that are paid into the state pension. So when you do that, they don't have law experience. They have maybe administrative experience. A judge nowadays doesn't judge. The trick to being a judge is moving X number of cases from the left side of the desk to the right side. And if you walk into any courtroom nowadays, you'll never see a full trial going on. You'll see hearings or occasionally some sort of citations or domestic cases occasionally. But rarely do you see a civil case or a criminal case because they're too inefficient and the judges don't like to hear them. They do everything they can to discourage them. And the prosecution, criminal side of the bench, does everything they can to make dispositions and get people to plead guilty, cutting down the trials. And this has all gone on since the 70s and the Nixon administration. But really, when you have limited training, limited experience, you can't really have common law because you don't have a commonality or a cross-section of people on the bench. You have administrators, and it's the adage, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Their view is, let's put more criminals in jail, let's forget about justice or anything like that, lock them up and not worry about them. And we've got really dichotomized over that. So when you get a case involving national security or politics or international affairs, your typical state prosecutor is going to be clueless on how to deal with it and how to handle it. And the government has other ways of dealing with that too. A guy with whom I practiced for 40 years has got a national security case going on, and they won't give him a clean room in order to read things or interview witnesses. And the case is going on and on and on and on. And I think the government's position is sooner or later somebody's going to get tired and they're going to get a guilty plea to something, and the case will go away, and we won't have to expose ourselves to any kind of things that might embarrass us or whatever. And that's sort of the attitude of your government anymore. It's more a matter of cover your ass and not let the public find out what's going on than it is getting justice or any kind of participatory democracy. And that's my rant for today. Please make a comment. I like to read your hate mail. And you guys have a good week.